I think that the heading was like, Starfield has an infinite number of things in it, except for a reason to keep playing.
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 431 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth, and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam, and I'm the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam, and I'm the artiste.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today is September 1st, 20 Jubilee. And before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be profanity in this show. And we'd also like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net, whose monthly donations help keep the podcast going. So thank you very much.
I didn't even know it was September until you said that just now.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't, but now it is.
Yeah.
So, yeah, for a little while. Now, all right, so you guys, some stuff happened this past week. Let's just get right into it. So for starters, I'm a beluga now.
Yeah, describe how you became a beluga and,
And
what
what that
inspired this
means.
change. What are we
Well,
talking
as you know, I'm from the Midwest.
Yes.
All my life, I've lived very far from the oceans, and I don't really go to the coasts that often. So this past week, I went with my wife and some old college friends to go see the U.S. Open, the big tennis event in New York City over at Arthur Ashe
New
Stadium.
York City.
Yeah, it was amazing. We watched 9 tennis matches. We were there for on the Monday of the tournament. So I think it was the first day. It was like qualifying rounds or something like that, or like very early seeds. And so we got to see some of the top 10 players in the world, men and women matches. And man,
so cool.
seeing these, especially some of these people. Like there's this one dude, he's like 6'10" or some shit like that, and it's he covers the court in like 3 steps. It is. I don't know how you get anything past these people. Like they're super fast. Like their reaction times are insane, and they're just like they're running and stopping so fast. Like tennis court is like that's like hard surface asphalt. Kind of, or not asphalt, but like texture wise. These fuckers are sliding on it. When they need to hit a shot, they run. And then they slide with their shoes, right? And then they exactly land where they need to hit the ball. It's like, what the fuck is this? This is not a frictionless surface, but they're doing it anyway because they don't give a shit because they're professionals.
It's like they choose how much friction they want.
Yes, yeah, like in tribes, you could ski. So,
Oh man, that was such a good game.
Such a good game. So then otherwise just spent a lot of time walking around New York City for several days. And I had been there before, so I wasn't there to do like touristy stuff. We were just walking around and checking out the neighborhoods and going to, grabbing coffee and all that stuff. But because I'm such an indoorsy boy, even the moderate amount of sun exposure on my head, I got a decent sunburn, and I use sunscreen and stuff, but I got a decent sunburn on my head. Nothing crazy, especially compared to what I would get when I was a youngster.
Yeah, back when you were like, no sunscreen. I don't need sunscreen.
Yeah. No sunscreen, no problem. I'll just peel off all my skin like a lizard.
Like a snake.
Yeah, there's new skin under there, no problem. So I got a moderate sunburn on my head, and then on the flight on the way back home, my forehead swelled up like a beluga melon. I'm like, maybe
It's like literally a beluga. Like it's the same shape.
It really is.
And
Yeah.
vibe as a beluga melon.
yeah. And I was like, it can't be the sunburn because I've gotten sunburns my whole life, and the only time I've ever had any kind of swelling from a sunburn was when it was a really, really bad sunburn when we were in Colorado in the mountains, and the sun was glaring off the snow. Yeah. And also windburn mixed in with it because we were skiing a bunch.
Yeah,
right?
you get a chapped face,
Because there's a lot of wind, and then the air is really dry because you're up in the freezing, air of the mountains. And it's like that plus all the sun. At that time I had a sunburn / windburn. It swelled up. This time it's there's no reason for this. So my assumption is that I just got too close to the ocean, as a Midwesterner, and I started evolving.
Yep.
Sort of like One Punch Man style, right? Where all the villains are like, I ate too many crabs and now I'm a crab, right?
Yeah. So I got too close to the ocean, and now I'm part Beluga, and so now that I'm back in the Midwest, it's kind of I'm returning back to corn or whatever I normally am. So that's.
Now, how's your resonance? Do you feel like you're really projecting out into space? When it comes.
Oh yeah.
I think you got to be able to really.
You got to get up into
some sounds out there.
Yeah, you got to get those really nasally sounds to harness the effect. Which.
Yeah, and I've tried talking to whales and stuff, but there aren't any around because I'm on land, so it hasn't worked out very good. But I'm doing my best.
You're like that's that one whale in the ocean that like had a weird song or whatever, and nobody ever responded to it. No other whales.
Yeah, that's one of the saddest things I've ever heard. Just this whale that
apparently
nobody can understand.
It did find someone later. They ended up finding it hanging out with some other whales. So.
Do you think they can understand each other, or do they just get each other's vibe?
I was gonna say maybe they're just vibing. Yeah, probably at least.
It's just a couple of neurodivergent whales, just like
just hanging out.
Just
they're like, nobody else gets us, and we don't get each other, but that's what makes us get each other. So. And in other news this week, Starfield is launching into some kind of a.
It launched yesterday.
They're doing they call it early access, but I think given the way that term actually works now, it's more like a pre-release. It's like you can get in to play just a game for 5 days ahead of schedule.
If you pay extra,
yeah.
I would actually say this better fits the phrase early access.
It does.
Which is like the game is actually done, and they're just giving some players access to it early.
Yes.
Whereas like normally when we talk about early access, we're talking about a game that is not done and is under development, and you can buy it before it's done. Well, that's not what this is. This is a week or whatever, 5 days before it launches. If you pay extra, you just get to play it.
Yeah, and I was when I saw the release date originally, because I didn't know they had this early access thing, and I saw the release date was the 6th, which is the day after our 3-day weekend in the United States, right? Because the 5th is a holiday, and I was like,
actually, that's smart.
I was like, what kind of bullshit, idiotic launch date is this, right? And then once I realized it was like, because now they can make you pay a premium to actually get to play it over that 3-day weekend, which is one of the most brilliant and evil. Yeah, I hate it. I hate it.
Kudos, but that's
very smart. Yeah,
sack of shit. Unreal.
Yeah, either that or it just happened that way. I don't know.
Doubtful.
No, I don't think
it's doubtful. $30 pre-order to get in early at a long weekend.
Yeah. So Starfield is by Bethesda. It's it's their first new IP in quite a long time, right?
Yeah.
So this is the makers of like Skyrim and Oblivion and Fallout and these kinds of open world RPG kinds of games.
And it's a little confusing because like they're the developer they're the IP holder, right, for those. And they're the developer of a subset of the games associated with those, but they're not always the developer. Sometimes they're the publisher. So actually knowing like what is a Bethesda game is always a little hard for me to keep track of.
So I'm pretty sure they were like the publisher of Fallout New Vegas. They did not develop Fallout New Vegas.
Yeah, but they did develop Fallout 3, 4, and 76.
And they forgot how to count in between, and then they
sometimes it happens.
Forgot a few other things too,
like how to make a game that people want.
Yeah.
I think they were like, it's Fallout 3, Fallout 4. If you add them together, is it 7 or 6? I don't know. Just put both those numbers in there.
Math is hard.
Let's go.
It's probably 76 is the next number. So I didn't even know about Starfield until maybe like 3 months ago.
Yeah, I barely knew about it.
Yeah. And it's been in development, I think, since Fallout 4.
It's been, and they've talked about it for a while. Like it was announced, I feel like 2 years ago, maybe a while ago.
It was just always detail light, though.
That was it. Yeah.
And so there wasn't anything to talk about. I think
and because it doesn't come from because it's a new IP. Then I think this is one of the interesting things based on that conversation we had last week, a few weeks ago, about being able to have a thing that people even know about is a gift in and of itself. I think it's an interesting example of that because I also saw the Starfield stuff. And I was like, I know it's by Bethesda, but I have no idea. Like they would just be like Starfield. And that was then like stars and stuff. And then you don't know, I don't know what's going to happen in there. So I can't really get excited about it.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Well, because it is a Bethesda game, they only make, one kind of game, really.
Yes. You're like, I know vaguely.
yeah, you kind of know what to expect. And that was what I could still kind of get excited about is like, I love the Fallout games. And so if it's basically Fallout in space, it's probably going to be good. But it's really hard to get like excited about that.
Meat to chew on.
Yeah, about that level of detail.
I was a little dubious because, well, for starters, Fallout 76 happened. We can't ignore the fact that happened.
To be fair, I mostly did ignore the fact that happened.
Yeah, but it did happen. And so, there's kind of this trust thing where it's like, okay, well, I'm going to let this kind of settle, because in my mind, I've already played an incredible Bethesda-like space game, which is Outer Worlds.
Yeah, which was
so like
just great. It was a great game.
So good. And it is that exact style of game. Like if you had told me, oh yeah, Bethesda made this, I'd be like, yeah, that tracks. And it even has that Fallout vibe where like it feels kind of old timey, but also in space. I don't know. It's cool.
And it's like anti-capitalist, that's the joke sort of set, which is also what Fallout's all about, right? Like
yeah. So literally, it's like Outer Worlds is like Fallout in space, right? And so when I heard about Starfield, I was like, wow, they've got a high bar because they need to do better than that, right? Better than Outer Worlds.
Their Fallout in space needs to be better than the other Fallout in space.
Right. Yeah. Because they're getting there second, but also the way that they were talking about the game, it was very list like where I never really got a sense of what was fun about it when people were talking about it, just that it's big.
Yeah.
So they'd be like, here are all the things that it has. And they'd be like 1,000 planets and this many spaceships and this many hours of quests or something. But I never really got a sense of like, is it good? Like, is it fun though? And so the reviews are starting to come in from critics. I think users can't really review it yet or something because of this weird like early access thing. I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to start seeing stuff today, really, because the early access started. I think actually started like Thursday midnight-ish, something like that, right? So, which
reviews
was
started coming out yesterday.
Yeah, reviews. So yeah, the official reviews started coming out yesterday, but also people started like doing like playing on stream and stuff yesterday when the embargo lifted because it was available in early access. So I think today is when we're going to start seeing a lot more information about the actual player experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so what's been interesting, kind of perusing through the reviews, is it's just a really strong reminder of something that we've talked about a while back about this idea of like changing or like giving the benefit of the doubt to established franchises or established studios in a way that other studios don't really get. And like, for example, if you look at a lot of the reviews will talk about it as like the best Bethesda game to date, right? And it's like, yeah, but like, is it good compared to like what else is out there
right now?
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but also the range of reviews has been really interesting. Like it's ranged from the most well-written RPG we've ever seen to like unimaginative and uninspired storytelling. Like it's like people are all over the place with the reviews, and I can't really figure it out. But there's also a lot of commentary about like the pacing, where apparently it's like in the first 10 to 15 hours, it's like real slow and it doesn't really pick up and like start to get interesting until about that point. And that to me is kind of if true, is kind of a problem, but it's amazing how many people are just like, yeah, it's okay. We just power through that. And then it gets
power through that entire game.
12 hours.
Yeah. I think what's so interesting about this, we talked about this with like Pokemon, a while ago, where they released with their most recent game, just so full of glitches and just ugly. I mean, I don't even got it.
It was nice. Like it was a bit of a hack job.
Just look at it. It's just like not very good looking. But the level of judgment is not then it's sort of noted as an aside, but not a thing that anybody cares about in an interesting.
Yeah.
Like,
the reviews will often say, like, well, once you look past A, B, C, D, it's a pretty good game, 9 out of 10, right? Yeah. And it's like nobody else gets that treatment.
There's an interesting thing with kind of earning your place. I think from a studio standpoint is really can it be the case that when your game comes out that it is primarily just measured against your own games as opposed to everything else in the world, which is sort of, especially when you're first time indie, you're launching a title, or even just if you're doing a if you're still not fully established in that kind of huge way that all these monster studios are. The reality is that you're basically judged against the entire pool as opposed to against your past efforts, right? Which is both, kind of annoying, but then in some ways also, I think it explains why, and partially in the indie space, you tend to see, or the smaller studio space, you tend to see more innovation and stuff, because it's like you have to do better. Like this, the only stuff I've seen so far about Starfield is like, the pacing is very fucking medium at the beginning. And then otherwise that like everything's cool. It's all cool and good, but like this still got all the inventory management issues from the past. There's still like the usual Bethesda glitches and things. But again, it's like, it's
basically sounds like
guaranteed.
Yeah, well, it's like the assumption is that your kind of micro experience of like interacting with interfaces and like doing just like normal stuff is like, it's like, yeah, that's bad, and that's just gonna be bad because that's how these games work.
That's just how we make. That's how we make these games.
But big picture though, like
it's pretty cool.
It's pretty neat because like look at the graphics, right? And look at how impressive it is that they accomplished. This scale of an endeavor, right? And so you're just like, and I think Bethesda to a large extent just like kind of rides on the joke really about like, you're actually like your moment to moment experience is actually going to be pretty bad actually.
A lot of jank.
Yeah. Just like a lot of jank.
It's not even that it's bad. It's just that there's just a lot of jankness. Like it might be bad in certain like particular ways, inventory management, but like otherwise it's just,
well, it's to me, when I say bad, I mean
clunky,
like, as in like it doesn't create anything like a good experience, right? And if like the best you can say about it is like I can put up with it is what those parts of the experience are, right? And like to their credit, they've managed to make games that otherwise are like, even though the rest of the stuff is apparently like an afterthought, right? They can actually get away with it, at least. Or have been able to, right?
I think we talk about this with the marketing stuff, right? It's like and this is something that we actually have to work internally to combat, being three people who I think get very annoyed by like jank in games and our own games too, right? Is recognizing when it just doesn't matter because you're targeting a higher order picture of an experience, right? Like to play Starfield, like they also have you can build your own ship, right? You build your own ship, you can add stuff to it. Looks cool as fuck.
Clunky and
I'm sure it's clunky,
too,
but it looks cool as shit. And then you can go like shoot pirates and stuff with your shit. It's like there's realities as far as like the big picture there of what your capital E experience is, right? Not your moment to moment, but like the narrative experience.
Well, yeah, I think EVE Online is like the perfect example of that, where it's like big picture, you're getting together with thousands of other like pilots in space and planning wars and, having giant battles and stuff. But that's about 0.1% of it. The rest is just like managing inventory and spreadsheets and logistics, right?
Well, so but I think it's interesting though, because like it's like because there's a question of wiggle room, like how much can you get away with when it comes to this, but there's also a question of like the impact on experience, right? Because it is true that like Bethesda can get away with having this kind of a on average janky experience, right? But it's also true that everybody who plays these games is very aware of that part of the experience. And it definitely takes away from the game, right? Like, it makes the gaming experience worse, and it distracts you, right, from otherwise the gameplay experience. Because when we're trying to decide, like, okay, what can we get away with, right? The question is like, what is the overall impact on the player experience? Like, how much is it actually going to detract from it? And if the answer is like, oh, actually, if we really like think about it, and don't just focus on the fact that it is jank, but just ask like, what is the impact? And if the answer is, oh, the impact is actually negligible, right? Then that's where we can be like, okay, let's avoid perfectionism because we can't afford that, right? But it does feel like Bethesda games, and I think a lot of games, period, but especially the ones that can get away with stuff. That bar for like how much they let the user experience actually be worse before they'll do something about it is really high, because they're just like, there's enough other stuff going on that we're like, you'll put up with it, so we can just let this be. And even though like the actual experience as a user is like, this kind of sucks. Like, this kind of sucks. Like, that's your actual thought as you're playing the game. Like, it's contaminated by like how much certain aspects of it suck, right? And they just get to write on the idea that like that because of what it is, because of the scale, because of your familiarity with IP, because you're just like have accepted that some of it's going to suck, right? That you'll then yourself just like bootstrap up to the big picture and be like, it's okay.
But
though.
I think there's something interesting about it, though, in the sense that, like, so for some reason, this thing that I think maybe Mrs. Griggs, remember Mrs. Griggs, our choir teacher in like seventh grade,
middle school,
That's a deep cut.
Yeah. So for some, I don't know why this
Middle school choir teacher.
This line has been in my head for the past like 2 weeks for some reason.
Okay.
She said at one point something like, if something's worth doing, it's worth doing well. Mm-hmm. Which was, the more I've been thinking about it, I think it's literally opposite, which is because, again, and this is what I think is related to the Starfield thing. If you could find an idea that is itself powerful enough, or a vision that's powerful enough, right, that delivering on it poorly is worth doing,
then that's a good idea.
That's a great fucking
it's
thing.
It's a powerful idea.
It's a powerful idea. And so it's almost like if something's worth doing, it's worth
Chat GPT is a good example, right? It's literally just a text box and you just type to it, right? It's so fucking hard to actually like use it with other things, but it's so crazy, interesting, and powerful that it was better that it exists in a shitty form. Exactly. It's available than in some perfect integration.
So I do think there's...
Yeah, but it's just all relative though, right? Because the fact is like using a chat, like when you use that chat interface, like the buttons do what you expect, whatever, like,
true,
like it looks nice, like it's actually not, it's just, that's not an ideal way to solve certain kinds of problems. That it honestly wasn't the intent of that interface, right? Everybody's using it outside of its intended case, but it's actually a perfectly well-designed interface for its purpose, which is basically an experimental platform to interact with a large language model, right? So I think this is one of those things where like the nuance here is infinite about what this means, because we're talking about like basically sliding scales of design preferences, tolerance for on the user side, tolerance on the design side, perfectionism versus like just getting it done. Like everything comes into play here, right? And we're all trying to thread needles, of like throughout this landscape to build stuff that actually can be successful. And in the end, the question is like, what is it you're trying to accomplish for your end users, right? And as long as you accomplish that, whatever the level of jank is that ends up in that final product, as long as that level of jank is part of the intended design experience, like that's part of the experience that you intend your users to have, right? And it's planned because you think,
I mean, it has to be planned, right?
In the sense that,
like,
right?
you have to know how much there is.
And what the impact is going to be.
Jankiness, what the impact is, and then how that relates to that overall strength of the vision, right? Like you can't get away with such nonsense if you're making a very small, like if you just like a nobody making a small game that doesn't have like a big, weird, innovative vision. You know what I mean? Like if you're just making like another, I don't know, like fucking asteroids. If like half the asteroids just blip out of existence a bunch and your main menu doesn't work, it's just fucking annoying to go play it. Like you can't, it's not, there's nothing worthwhile for sticking through. You know what I mean?
Well, my approach is I'm still in Baldur's Gate. So I'm going to keep playing that for a while. And then once I'm done with that,
in a year or two. Yeah.
I'll see what kind of the consensus is on Starfield. Cause like I do want to play another, space RPG, but
it looks fun.
There's something that stands out to me because I'm in the Starfield and the Baldur's Gate subreddits. And so, I was in the Baldur's Gate subreddit in the first, week of launch and still am. And still to this day, the conversation in the subreddit is just people just exuberantly just sharing their experiences with the game, comparing notes, talking about strategies, showing screenshots, telling funny stories. It's just people having a great time with the game. The Starfield subreddit is mostly people debating about whether the game is good.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is the jank experience, right? I think this is what happens. It's like it clouds it.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't. It's hard to. It's like a foggy windshield where you're like, I think that this is good and I'm on the road, but also like I have to fucking, like
you have to think about it. You have to decide it. You have to decide intentionally if it's good instead of just having a good experience and being like, well, I had a good time. It must be good, right? You actually have to decide like, is it okay that all this stuff sucked, Yeah.
And it's even simple stuff like, so Starfield is a first-person game, and one of the core settings that's been in first-person games for a long time is field of view settings. In large part because that is it's an accessibility feature for motion sickness. So some people get motion sick in certain fields of view, and then if they can expand it or usually expand it, I think narrowing it
always
usually
want
makes
bigger.
it worse.
Yep.
But being able to expand the field of view helps a lot. And like there are no field of view settings in
Oh, really?
Starfield. But so then like there was people talking about that in the subreddit and about like, oh, well, it's not that big of, so some people kind of like huffing on the copium, right? Like it's not that big of a deal, blah, blah, blah. And then other people start sleuthing. And then finally, like today, some people posted, okay, here's how you can change your field of view. And like some people found various like files that you can mess with in the config and
There's
stuff.
almost
And
always
it's
an INI file for Bethesda games.
Yeah,
that just, you
yeah.
can just like plop stuff into. Yeah.
Yeah, because like Bethesda games are very moddable, right? And which also means like just messing with all kinds of other bits of data in the game files. And so now people are like, okay, cool. Like the field of view problem is fixed, right? And so like the community is kind of like trying to figure out ways to get past all the jank so that they can like bring more people into the fold, But like they have to work so hard to do it, and like I just didn't see that with Baldur's Gate is just like people just jump in and just off they go, just having a blast right out of the gate. Once they get past 45 minutes of character creation, which I assume Starfield has to. Yeah. So anyway, point being, like I don't know if Starfield is good or bad. I haven't played it, but I do think that the overall hedging that I'm seeing when people talk about it is telling. So,
I think it just is, again,
My bet is
what you'd expect from Bethesda, which is disappointing at this point. And I'm not even kidding. Like, if you as a studio know that you have produced these like giant award-winning adventures that tons of people are into, you have an even bigger budget than you've ever had before, and then you're just like, let's not put field of view settings as a slider. What the fuck are you doing? I'm not even like, what are you doing? Like, you could build a whole universe and you can't put a field of view slider in. It's so dumb. It's like, it's disappointing on such a small, like what?
Well, I think it's one of those. Like,
It's so confusing.
To me, there's a kind of a tech bro vibe like that comes from this word, because like when I'm thinking about the experiences that I want to have, whether it's coding like in my editor, right? Like the thing that matters the most is not the big picture. Actually, it's the moment to moment experience.
Yep.
And that, like, the slicker that is, the better my life gets, the happier I am, the more I just like don't notice stuff, right? I'm just having a good time. And the end result is that even if the big picture actually is less interesting, if it's just everything is nice, like I don't even notice.
Slide around.
It's just like,
well, think about like Rocket League, right? There's no big picture here.
Yeah.
You just fucking.
but moment to moment, it fucking nails it so hard, right? It's just every moment is a good experience. And I feel like with games like the Fallout series and all this kind of stuff, right? Like the stuff that actually is easier, which is like UIs are hard to design, sure, but it doesn't take you years to design a good UI experience.
It's not as hard. Yeah, it's not as hard.
It's not as hard as the fucking game,
Yeah, the whole fucking thing. Yeah,
Yeah, and like, but they're like, if you like when you're playing Fallout or presumably this new game, right? Like, so much of your time is like opening up your Pip-Boy and like looking at your map and like going through your inventory and like whatever, right? So much of your gameplay experience is actually that. And
not in Starfield because they don't have a map. So
right, yeah. So
I saw somebody complain. They're like, there's these giant cities and like towns and stuff, and there's no map. So like I keep getting lost in this city, and then like the next comment's gonna be like, I kind of like that there's no map. It really helps me engage with the world. Dude, come on.
Yeah.
There's a difference between like a full detail Ubisoft map that's like, here's all your quest markers, and a like Elden Ring map that is basically, here's the shape of things and where you are relative to them, so you can. Yeah,
there's a whole gradient of ways you can have a map while still not giving everything away, right? Yep. But having no map is.
This is what I mean.
It feels less like a decision and more like
they were like, oh, what matters here really is like the world, not the experience of being in it, right? Because like to me, that's what a lot of like AAA like the vibe is that I get is like all of the investment is in like the simulation of whatever the world is that they're trying to create, right? And like the story that then unfolds and like all the kind of stuff that's going on in there. And then everything else is treated as like, oh, well, we have to have a UI. So I guess we'll put one in.
I guess we will begrudgingly put one in.
Yeah, like that's like the vibe I always get when I play these big titles. And not always, I'm definitely, exaggerating here, but to the point where when I play a game that has like a good moment to moment experience with like all their interfaces and stuff, right? Like I actually get like fucking pumped when I open up a UI,
It's
right?
a delight.
Because
Yeah.
it's like, but especially in contrast, where I'm like, I'm so used to being like, oh, I can't even read this, and I can only make the text so big because they were like, only babies play these games, I guess, so they have perfect eyeballs and don't need to have things be large. You're like, it's just, I don't know. I just find it so bizarre.
I don't know. I think that's what's weird about it. Is it's like it's almost like a craftsmanship thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's like
definitely.
I get that you can build like a giant thing, and that's super cool. I'm not like I'm sure as far as like the actual, again, that meta level experience of Starfield is probably cool as shit, right? Building your own ship, doing whatever. But it's just so weird to me, just so weird from that crafts angle that like you wouldn't
to let the smaller stuff make that worse.
Yes.
That's
That's
what happens, right?
Because also it's so much easier to manage. Like it's so hard to deliver on the really, really big thing, right?
Yeah.
It's really hard. By contrast, it's quite easy to deliver on most of the small things.
Field of view slider.
Yeah. So what?
Why?
It's not like you didn't have the reason. That's what. It's not that you didn't have the reason.
Well, and that was another kind of interesting note.
I'm so confused.
I saw a lot of people talking about the loading screen problem. Because
you're loading all the time.
I believe this is probably built on the same engine as prior Bethesda games. And like for example, if you fast travel in those games, then you hit a load screen, right?
Or if you go into a building, you load, and
yeah. And so I saw somebody who, again, this was in the Starfield subreddit. This person was praising the game. Like, however, I do have some complaints. And they're like, the big one is that it doesn't feel like an open world because
you're loading constantly.
Because by comparison, imagine if you're playing Skyrim and you're like in a building, you leave the building and there's a load screen, and then you like see your horse in the distance and you want to like go to another town, and so you teleport to your horse and go through a load screen, and now you're standing at your horse. And, you interact with the horse, and then you say where you want to go, and then there's a load screen while you teleport to that town, and you're never actually like walking around, like traveling between the places. You're just kind of like load screen.
Which is also like when the scale of your open world game is like a galaxy, right? Like
that's a lot of load screen experience.
Well, you have to be teleporting, because like because you don't actually. When it's one of those interesting things, right? Because you might observe that that's kind of weird and it doesn't feel good, but you also definitely don't want the other thing, which is like
of sitting in a spaceship for 16 months.
Yeah. Or
while
walking 10 miles to the place where all the spaceships can take off because it's far enough away from civilization or whatever.
Yeah.
You don't actually want that. Right. And it's just a kind of inherent conflict of like the design goals
of scale,
of like
a space game.
Yeah. A space game. It just doesn't, a space game can't be open world and like in a meaningful, or in the way that we think about it.
But what I thought was really interesting is when I read some reviews about this, they were basically like they talked about this and then they said, but of course, like it makes sense and it's a huge game and like we can't really expect Bethesda to hit like that No Man's Sky level of tech where they just have the seamless.
No Man's Sky, just a small company, was
made by 12 people.
Yeah. I was actually gonna say, I was like, you actually can expect,
and they could have bought them. You know what I mean? Like that's the money scale difference. Although actually at this point they made so much money from No Man's Sky that would be probably harder to purchase.
But I think that's what I think the reality is though, that you can have an open world game in space with basically no loading screens because we've already seen it.
But also not one where there's anything fun to do.
Also, perhaps a good point. But maybe you could settle somewhere in between, right? Where it's like you pick your points where loading is required and not, and don't fucking shoot it. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm like, what?
Well, it's the expectation setting, right? Where people say like, we can't expect Bethesda to do this thing that this other company did because Bethesda just doesn't do that thing. They don't do seamless
to be fair though, like that is actually a true kind of a statement,
true.
Right? Because
it's true. Yeah, it's a tech problem, right?
It's a tech problem. And the way that like institutional knowledge works and that kind of stuff is like you keep on, the only reason something like Starfield can exist is because Bethesda's continued to invest in the same tech and the same people and all that kind of stuff, right? So that they could produce something like that, but that does then come with inherent limitations. And I think there's also that kind of conflict because we talk about this too when we're trying to decide what to do with our games. Is like if you go outside of the scope of what your tech and your people can do, right? So in this case, it's like, oh, let's make a space game. Let's make our Fallout in space, right? Except space is big, it's got a different fucking set of problems. And it actually, there just is a conflict there between all the stuff that you've invested all of your time into and you've been successful with, and the overarching like principles that go into that kind of a game. And I think that just is true. So when people say like, oh, well, we can't expect them to do what this other team did, I do think that that's true.
Yeah.
Whether or not that means they then should have done it is, I think, right, the question that comes up.
Well,
but like,
yeah,
I would prefer,
but again,
there to be a Fallout in space than to not be a Fallout in space. You know.
But I think the point is that it's the measuring stick difference, which is like, when you say, oh, we can't expect someone like Bethesda, right, to produce a game that doesn't have this weird bullshit going on in it.
That would be fine if they evaluated everybody else based on.
Yeah, but that's the thing. It's like no one knows what you made or like where no one's evaluated. It's a level of it's a gift. It's a huge gift based on your prior successes, right? To be able to have that be the way people talk about your stuff. Pokemon's
to me, this is no different. Like, let's say we decided our next game is going to be a multiplayer game, and we make it, and
just janky as fuck.
It's a complete piece of shit, right? And then
impossible to connect to each other. You lose connection constantly. Data gets desynced. Yeah, all that stuff.
And if all the reviews said like, well, you know, this is their first multiplayer game, and like they haven't developed the tech to do multiplayer up until now. So the fact that it even exists as a game is honestly so good. Yeah,
what a gift.
Yeah, so like an 8 out of 10 for sure.
We'll dock half a point for the core feature of the game. And
it's like what we should expect is for them to update their tech to deliver on the promise of the game that they're making.
Yes.
You know? So like, sure. There are a lot of load screens in Skyrim and Fallout and whatever. But those, like you said, those aren't in space. so there's much, if you're going to make a game that's at scale, you got to start thinking about these problems. But again, it won't even matter. They're still going to sell 1 trillion copies and it'll be fine, you know?
Well, and then again, like if the overarching gameplay experience is good enough that the fact that you're constantly distracted by shitty experiences is outweighed by the rest of the game, then in the end, like
if it's worth doing, it's worth doing.
On balance,
it's fine, you know, but I do find it to be just kind of a, more than anything, like just conceptually a bummer. Cause on the one hand, it kind of feels, it feels rude to your user base when you're just like, I know you'll put up with this, so I'm going to make you put up with it. Like I don't like that, you know.
It's just disappointing.
It's just disappointing
from a studio to studio level. It's just like you could not. Yeah. It would be so easy for you to not.
Every moment could be delightful. Like, why isn't that
which is not the goal? You know?
Yeah, why isn't that the bar? Yeah.
I don't. Yeah, beyond like core engine problems, like a fucking field of view slider is not like Bethesda has decades of tech it can't figure it. Like, no, that's not a thing.
Yeah, think about it, especially when like actually once it's revealed too, because like it is like it would be weird if they couldn't do field of view, right? Because that's like built into every engine in the universe, right?
Yeah, but once it's revealed that it's in the INI file,
it's definitely in there though too, right? That's the thing we discovered, that it's like, and you don't get to just tweak that, you know.
That's what I'm saying. I'm like, I want
honestly though,
I want to be so happy for them. That's a hard thing to launch, right? Big crazy thing to launch. Mm-hmm. So, but it's kind of hard to be when there's almost an in your face level of not caring.
Yeah. Like not considering what you're.
Yeah. It's just weird. It's so weird. I can't.
Well, here's the thing though. I think this is a big studio problem. Cause when I think about like when we're working on Crashlands 2 stuff, we are playing Crashlands 2, and the people who are developing the content are the people who are like actively engaging with the game day to day all the time, right? And so the question is like, whose job is it to put a setting in, right? And it's like, well, it could be any of us, right? Like if we run into a thing, we're like, wow, we need to get this setting in, then we can do that, right? And because we are playing the game and we have the power to make changes to the game, then those things become obvious to us, like right away.
You can shore up some of basically shore up a lot of those smaller jank details without much fuss, right?
Yeah. And so the problem is like in a huge studio, you've got specialists. And I'm going to go on a limb and say there's not a settings page specialist. There's not a person whose job it is to make sure that there's all these settings, right? They'll have somebody whose job it is to, they'll have a 10-person team who's working on shaders and like all these different things that are all about like big picture things.
Right. So you lose the details basically in that.
Yeah.
kind of.
And yeah, because like in our case, each of us, everything is our job. And so as things come up, we can just deal with them and we don't have to have a big meeting about small things. Right. And so when you have like a trillion small things, none of which are anybody's specific job, I think they just fall through the cracks.
A beef for me though, because it's like the whole point of like someone like a game director, for example, is to fill that low to high level gap. And so
is to advocate for everything.
Yeah. So you got Todd
But again,
Howard.
they don't like. They just advocate for the big stuff.
Yeah, that's
I think the really good
yeah.
ones do though. Yeah. Like the really good ones do point at how the small stuff is the big stuff. Because like when like you mentioned Todd Howard had the guy, one of the founders of Bethesda, had the interview where he's like, yeah, I'm like 150 hours deep in Starfield and it's getting so good or whatever. If the inventory is shit, Todd, that it's shit. So like Todd has spent probably like 15 hours then fiddling around with some inventory management nonsense.
Actually, now, as you say that, what the real problem is that the people that are guiding at these top levels don't have ADHD because.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe.
You know what I mean? Because like.
I don't know.
Because like literally the moment I step into any experience in like Crashlands 2, if there's even the slightest bit of like, oh, this is annoying and I don't want to have to keep doing it, then I'm like, hey, can we find a way to
making
not
a
do
Favreau
this?
card.
Yeah, I'm making a card instantly because like my tolerance for it is zero. And I think the question is like, and everybody has different tolerances for like that kind of stuff, right? And I think,
but it's always a tolerance. You know what I mean? It's always a tolerance.
Yeah, exactly. But depending on where your tolerance is, because that's when you if you have a high tolerance for something, it is not a big deal to you, right? And if you can't see how it's a big deal to other people, and you're also the one who chooses what happens, right? Then the end result is that you've basically put the because like everything has a tolerance bar for the most part. Because like the fact is like there's no such thing as fun inventory management, right? This seems like there ought to be, right? But usually at best inventory management is just like not a big deal. It's just like, right? It's like
smooth means to an end.
It's smooth and easy. Like you have some goal and you can accomplish it. It's not a big deal, right? That's actually what you're looking for certain kinds of experiences. And so for the most part, like it is kind of just a tolerance spectrum. It's just like how much do people have to tolerate to like accomplish their goal for things that just kind of can't just be fun, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if you're coming in with just a high level of tolerance, you truly can't understand why other people think it's a big deal, right? Like you just can't. I mean, we've had these interactions in the studio too, where like where someone is just like, because we're like, and like, because like I'll look at what the stuff that like that Sampy can do, right? Where she can just like fucking power through. She does all of our HR and business stuff and stuff that's like all externally interacting, like designed to be the worst experience possible for us.
Dealing with everybody else's.
You're just dealing with everybody else. You're dealing with phone calls and like being on hold and dealing with forms and like and like bureaucracy, right? It's just all the worst experiences. And which isn't to say she loves it, but for her, it's just like not a big deal, Yeah,
she has the capacity more than anybody I've ever met to just be totally chill.
Yeah,
with like just jumping into any janky ass process that some other person put together and just be like, yeah, I can work with this.
Yeah, she can make it work. Right? Which is, and that's the kind of thing. Is
super
like,
high tolerance.
Yeah, and so if you have somebody who has that level of tolerance, then like designing something, right? If they're not annoyed by the stuff that they produce because it's like at the level of tolerance that they don't even notice is a problem, right? Then that's what the outcome will be, right? And so I think so much of this depends on just like, and I think we as a team, I think largely because of just how much ADHD we've got going on in here, right? Like our tolerance for stuff is really low, and so now because that kind of stuff, like the stuff that we're talking about in this game, right, is the stuff that makes me stop playing games, like because my tolerance is just too low. I can't. Like I've got some friends who've been playing Valheim just like every weekend for like months and months and months and months, right? But when they invited me to join, and I played with them a little bit, but at the point I played them was at the point where inventory management starts to suck, right? Mm-hmm. It's like
because you just have too many
right at the start of Iron Tier, right? It's just like just fucking sucks. And I came in and I played one session with them, and they were having a blast. And they're still playing months later, right? And the thought of even jumping back in that game like gives me anxiety, So I can't. And it's basically because like that's where my tolerance is, right? So which is all to say like the difficulty of like choosing how to thread all of these needles, right? This is why it's so hard. Is because
very hard.
It is the case that everyone's tolerance is different, and if you have this like as Bethesda, if what you've seen over the years is that, like our level of tolerance at the high level design for like bullshit, right?
Yeah, is more than sufficient to knock
Is
out
sufficient for us to win
yeah.
awards and make games and like accomplish what we're trying to accomplish. Then and apparently like truly don't understand why this is a big deal to people, right? Because that's the part where I'm like, it's a big deal though because everybody talks about it constantly, and so it just still feels offensive to not do something about it.
But I would think about it this way: their job is to sell copies.
Yep.
Right. And what we've kind of found with working on like original Crashlands and Levelhead and stuff is like when we're really ramping up marketing and stuff, nobody gives a shit about all those details. Like you can't sell a game based on the fact that it has a field of view slider. You sell the game based on the high level vision. And like the bigger and more grandiose that vision is, the more likely you can build up a big fat hype train, right? Yeah. And only once people get into the door,
they don't impact launch day, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And so like I saw some interesting charts. There's the website steamcharts.com where they aggregate data from Steam games, like concurrent users and stuff. And people were overlaying Baldur's Gate, Baldur's Gate's launch like first few weeks over some other big single player games like Cyberpunk and Elden Ring and stuff. And Baldur's Gate just has this incredible staying power where people just keep playing it. They just keep coming back and playing it because they're just having a great time, right? Like, yeah, even Baldur's Gate has, inventory management and encumbrance and stuff, but they also have all kinds of ways for you to deal with it that are just like super fast and easy, even to the point where like you might come across like a treasure chest in Baldur's Gate that you can't open because you don't have enough lockpicking skill or whatever. You can literally just take like one of your characters, pick up the treasure chest, put it in your inventory, and then you just send it to your camp and it just teleports back to your camp. And it's just chilling there waiting for you to lockpick it whenever you want, right? And so like, your characters do get encumbered, but they have all these ways for you to just like offload stuff and filter and sort and organize things and automatically, right? And so it just doesn't matter then at that point, right? And so like that amount of jank it just eats into the experience over time.
Yeah, I think my beef is a simple one, which is that when you're at the level of both craft and business that you're talking about, a studio like Bethesda's at, to say that you can only focus on this big picture thing.
Yeah, how? Yeah. How can a small team? Yeah, how does a small team focus on everything, and a huge team can only do one thing?
It's just not true.
I think kind of said what Sam you were talking about a little bit earlier too, or just about like what it's like to actually build things, right? Because this also means that because everybody on the team who's working on a game, right, has to be pulling down the game, playing it, seeing what happens when they do X, like making sure that the changes that they're making do have the goal that they accomplish, right? Which means that everybody, and this is kind of like how we focus on stuff and how we think about it, right? Is like, if something sucks for us on the development side because we have to interact with the game to then observe the changes that we're making, right? We're dog fooding constantly, right? We're like we're eating all the dog food that we're making, right? We're like we're experiencing the outcome of our decisions constantly. And anybody making games is. And so that's part of what's so baffling to me too, is that like it makes sense that at the top level someone's making the decision where they're like, we don't care about this level of jank because we can get away with it. But the thing that's wild to me is that also means they're wasting everybody else's time.
Yes. Yeah.
And the whole team. If you got like 200 people, think about how much time you're wasting because your people have to also manage their inventories while they're doing development tasks.
Or just the loading.
Yeah.
It's like
that's like a compiling time, It's like
if you imagine going in to try to test something and you got
it's 12 minutes of load screens or something.
To your spaceship over to I don't know.
Honestly, like that's something that we're already struggling with because Crashlands 2 has just tons and tons of stuff. And we are like every couple weeks we're doing some work to cut down on the load times, which is to say it's more like the boot up time because like once you're in the game in Crashlands 2, there's no load screens or anything. But actually like getting the game booted up, we do have to compile the game data and hydrate it and all that stuff. And I think at this point, like on the uncompiled version of the game, it's like 9 seconds to boot up the game,
which is just too long.
Which is extremely fast compared to load times of AAA games. But also like if every time we want to test a change, we boot up the game and have to wait 9 seconds. That's long enough that you just kind of like
it's just not good.
wander off.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah, so like we're always trying to cut down on that stuff for our own development. Yeah, like you guys are right that like if you don't prioritize that, then you're paying 200 people to just stare at load screens.
Yeah. Or even like interact with like bad UIs, right? And like because like not everybody on your 200 person team has perfect eyesight and a perfectly clear monitor, right? So like the fact that this stuff doesn't float up to the top where someone's like, we really need to be able to like juice the shit out of how big, because like in my opinion, like almost no games, especially AAA games, let the text get big enough. It's just I want to be able to.
Yeah, we know from writers
it's
hard
I know
to do
why.
it.
Yeah, I absolutely know why. But again, that's one of those things that like you can solve those problems. They're challenging, but you don't need 200 people to solve those problems, right?
Right.
And you can solve them all up front, right? You solve them all up front based on, and you figure out what the parameters are to make all that stuff work, and you design with that once you've sort of figured it all out, right? And I agree, hard.
It's hard,
right? But so is everything else. So you know,
so is building a whole fucking universe.
Yeah, so it's building a universe. I don't think it's a reasonable excuse on their side to be like, well, it's just hard to have large text, because like
we talk a lot about in DevOps this idea of team topologies, which is the shape of the team is the shape of the product at the end of the day, right? The way that your process flows, the way that your company is set up structurally, who's allowed to talk to who, how easy is it for any given person to make changes, whatever, is in the product. You can only build a certain kind of product with a certain team shape, right?
Yeah. Much like your tools also dictate the
it's the same. It's the same
product.
And so what I think is interesting then too about that is that what does that say to you about what, say, working at Bethesda is like?
Yeah, I would be very curious to like.
I'd be very curious because I got an idea of it. I think it's again big vision, cool as shit, day to day.
Pretty fucking
janky.
Yeah, drudgery is probably.
If I had to guess,
like,
and again, like I think it's just the reason I keep using the word disappointing is because even if that high level experience is amazing, I think what's disappointing is like if you have the resources to do like a full knockout on a game of this scale, where you can take a minute, clean up the jag, fucking add a field of view slider, whatever.
Yeah. Why not do that?
Why not? Because you see, like Seth would say, you see the response, which people are like, it's almost this like, I am in love with the ideas presented here, even some of the gameplay presented here.
People
but I can't
want to give this game a 10 out of 10. They want to. They're trying to.
Yeah,
right?
because it has all the stuff, right? And it's like, why couldn't you just give that to it? Why are you being so weird about this?
Yeah, it is true. Because if you look at the complaints, right? Because like some of it is a lot more difficult, which is like complaints about
deep
like,
design shit.
Sure. Yeah, design stuff for the narrative being kind of boring or whatever, right? But most of the complaints that are knocking down the scores, at least that I've seen from the reviews I read so far, are
all this little
stuff. It's this stuff. It's this stuff that's like it's cumulatively so much stuff that it's knocking down what people and you can hear them as they're writing. They're just like they're trying not to. They're trying to frame everything in the best way possible. They're trying not to dock points.
Yes.
But they're also trying to be honest, right? At the same time,
people say this literally. Like you'll see in so many of these professional reviews. I want to love this game.
Yeah,
I want to have reasons to. I even saw one that was like, Starfield has. I think the heading was like, Starfield has an infinite number of things in it, except for a reason to keep playing. And then, but in the review, they were just talking about how like it felt. They said it felt like somebody took a big feature list and just turned that into a game, but without actually like focusing on having it actually be like super fun moment to moment, and all of that. Yeah, and they're like, and they still gave it a high review score. They gave it like a 7 or an 8 out of 10 or something like that. But yeah, and they kept framing it as, I love the overall concept. I want to spend time in this world, but I keep getting pushed out of it.
Yeah, but this is the most supreme kind of disappointment, because what this means to me is that you are a foot away from a Hall of Fame situation,
an incredible experience.
Yeah. Well, and to get there, you could have improved also your whole dev team's experience for years.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. So
why,
what?
So why not? Yeah.
Good question, Sam.
But it's
a deep one.
You know what I mean? It's maddening. It's like because it's
like it
so
feels like we
hard.
have to be missing something, right? Because it's so absurd that's what happens. So it's like, what are we? Are we missing something, or is it just like, working there is just drudgery, and like there's only high vision stuff, and the people who run the show believe that the details don't matter? Like, is that? Because that can't be true, right?
Or
like,
they're banking on the mod community, like this is.
But even then, they're deciding to have years of a worse, more expensive development experience where everybody's having a worse time to have a product that you launch that then gets docked on those very same features, basically, right? That could have been basically 9s and 10s instead, right? Mm-hmm. And like that's the inevitable outcome of all those decisions. So why?
I don't know.
So why?
I don't get it. I think it's so hard. It's so hard to make the thing, like the big, cool, crazy thing that everybody is interested in, and they did that. So why
it's
not?
So easy to do all the little,
the
little thing.
I don't know.
Well, we think it is,
and relatively,
it is by relative comparison.
Relatively.
It is.
Yeah,
it is. Like.
Well, but again, so a lot of it too is like a tech and design problem. Because when I think about like when we were working on our games earlier, and again, this is from the perspective of new programmers, 3-person studio, blah, blah, blah. There were certain things that were really, really hard, like making interfaces.
Yeah.
Right. Until we finally were like, all right, fuck this. And then spent a couple months developing an entire like tech stack for easily assembling interfaces.
But we took a couple months with a whole ass 100% of our game programmer team, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we made
thought it was important.
Yeah, and like, but it still only took a few months out of the overarching development cycle, right?
Yeah.
And if you're a huge enterprise with hundreds of people at your disposal, make a 10-person team for a few months, and the game could still be developed as that's happening, right? Like
it. Well, yeah. I mean, maybe. I don't know. I always feel like whenever I hear about how big studios work, it just seems like everything is way harder. Like way harder.
But here's the weird thing. Here's the weird thing, right?
Does it have
again, if the game is designed for modders to be able to go fix shit, modders, a random person.
Yeah, then a random person on the dev team could probably
what the fuck? That's my question. Couldn't someone have put I'm getting stuck on this field of view slider thing because it's representative
not add this setting
of the problem. Yeah, could someone not add this setting? Could someone not fucking add a sort button to I don't even know how the inventory works, but I'm going to assume there's no sorting, there's none of this other bullshit. It's like how do you produce that game at the end of the day that is moddable, but you didn't mod it yourselves before you fucking launched it?
Well, again, it's probably back to what you're talking about with the moment-to-moment experience of working on the game. If, for example, and again, like we don't know behind the scenes of how their structures work, but like let's say hypothetically, if you wanted to add a feature or add a setting or whatever, if there was a 16-step process, right?
And people fought you every step of the way.
Yeah. And like you've got to have meetings and you got to convince people and you've got to bring data and research about why this feature is worthwhile and what's the demand for it and blah, blah, blah. Then it's like something as simple as just adding a slider for a variable that's just a single number that already exists in the game code is such a small thing that it's not worth the fixed cost of going through all of the
and especially because like the thing is
bureaucracy.
Like, if you're in a high jank environment, right? Mm-hmm. If it's already the case, and this is what all this is like, again, we don't know what's going on. Maybe there's just something we just are really missing about how this all works, right? But the implication of all this is that everybody's operating in a high jank environment, so that as they're doing stuff, every moment has a degree of being excruciating, right? Mm-hmm. And in that kind of a scenario, like you're saying, like it might be that to make a small change, you have to fight and go through bureaucracy to do it. So small changes don't get made. That is the outcome of that, right? But if that's in the context of like your experience as a developer, just being kind of brutal and like sucking away your energy and like not being good, you can't advocate for the downstream consumer. You don't have enough fucking energy left, right?
You can't even, you're just trying to advocate for yourself.
Oh, and you actually, and if you also can't even advocate for yourself, if like that's the kind of environment that you're in, like you can't go that extra mile at all to do that because you can't even fix problems that are also, again, all these problems that we're talking about that hit the downstream user also hit you in development. they also hit your QA team, right? So it's impossible for people to not be aware of it. It's literally not a thing that could have happened, right? Like, so people are aware that like, oh, somebody on the fucking team wanted an FOV slider. Definitely. There's no way that didn't happen. So the question is like, why doesn't this thing exist, right?
Is it because like there's a top-down method of working on the game where, you know, the programmers don't get to decide or advocate for what they feel is important to work on. It's just they get a list of next things to implement, and that's always big picture stuff, right?
And is the moment-to-moment work just like so soul-sucking that you just can't be bothered to try to fix anything because there's a million problems? Who
if
cares?
Somebody who listens to this podcast works at Bethesda. Just send us a note because I
tell us what it's like.
What's going on in there? Because it looks like it's not the best. If I could be honest,
I would say you should be able to tell. Like, you're right, Sam. I think you should be able to tell a lot about what it's like to work in an organization by playing the game that they made, right? I feel like we can see some things, but we don't know for sure, right? So, I'd be interested. Of course, don't violate any NDAs or anything like that. But yeah, if anybody's working at Bethesda, you hear about this, I'm curious. What's it like?
Are we way off, or are there somehow good reasons for all this that we just don't understand? Because we're a tiny team.
I would go say.
I can't imagine what they would be, but if they exist, I would love to hear about.
There will be reasons.
We have a field of we have a field of view setting in Crashlands 2, and it's a
2D game. It's 2D. Oh my god!
And it's because we played it on mobile, and we're like, wow, this is a little bit hard to see.
Yeah,
we'll just add a setting. Yeah, no, and again, field of view in 2D is basically just like just zoom in a little bit, right? But
and it's true. Still, like we can't zoom in. There's certain levels at which you can't zoom in, and you can't zoom out because of all other reasons, right? You need to. Yeah. There's a range. Certainly, but we at least expose it. Give it a fucking option.
But we played it, and we're like, wow, it's a little bit hard to see. Took 6 minutes, added a setting, and we're okay. There, done. No problem.
The text can get big enough that I can just kind of read it whenever I'm looking at it. Although I haven't truly investigated that deeply yet, so I might. I'm part of the basically blind club, so
but we've set it up flexibly because we know that some people have a hard time reading text, and we set up our interfaces to be able to accommodate different sizes of text and fonts, right? So, which was also a note that apparently the font settings in Starfield are like you can't really do much to make things more readable, etc. Like it's all it's just this big stack of micro jank, right? Yep. So, I'm curious to hear about it. But anyway, I guess that's all the time we have. So I probably won't have played Starfield by the time we get to our next episode, but I'm curious to hear maybe from some of our listeners if you have any thoughts about it. You can always go to podcast.bsketch.net and drop some notes, questions, whatever.
Or that's all the time we have. Discord.
Yeah, just wherever. We'd like to thank our producers, Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta, for putting the podcast together. And thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, you can just go to podcast.bsketch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the archives. And of course, if you haven't yet, head on over to the Crashlands 2 Steam store page and give us a wish list that helps us juice the algorithm and get the game more exposure on Steam. We'd appreciate that. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.